You've worked with some amazing global leaders in your time. What set Steve Jobs apart?
Steve was unique, certainly. I think he was a complicated person. He had little patience for people who weren't furthering his cause or his vision, but he had that vision. You could debate whether it was like this grand vision of how the world would work or simply an understanding of human beings and what we want in our lives and how he would deliver that to them. But he was not quite the brute that a lot of people made him out to be. I mean, he certainly had those features, don't get me wrong, and I was on the receiving end of a couple of those tirades, but he was charismatic and funny, charming. He could really be, a fantastic person. And I had the good fortune of working with a really smart group of people. And more times than not, we succeeded. So Steve had respect for us, and he would invite us into the secret meetings and things that outside people wouldn't normally be invited into. And I think as you succeeded with him, he would be more comfortable that you could handle that. And he would give you a problem and say, now you need to solve this, and I want to see what you come up with. He was a fascinating character.
That perfectionism, I mean, how important is that as a trait in a leader, do you think?
I think it is important for someone to have sort of uncompromising standards that way. Now, you could argue whether the person has to react as Steve did. There was a verb that people used, like, I got Steved yesterday, and everybody knew what that meant.
And did he move on quite quickly himself once he had an outburst?
Yes, it was known as the hard reset. So he could tell you were an idiot one day, and how dare you? Yes, and then the next day it would be as if that never happened. You were judged on what you showed him that day.
What role does creativity play in leadership? Because it's not always a given, a leader will be creative.
Well, I think that's one of the great things about working with Steve is that he was a man who loved creativity and understood the power of it. He liked to judge creative work. He would respond to it. This is a little side story, but it's kind of a funny thing because sometimes he would reject our work. One time in particular, I'm thinking of the best he could do. He couldn't put his finger on it. It was like, well, it's just not Apple. And we were like, well, but it is really, because it does this and it does that. Well, he wouldn't budge. And I remember on the way to the airport after that meeting with our group of creative people, I was sort of thinking about that, and it was sort of soaking in that. So, well, it's a tough thing to argue, because if he says it's not Apple, well, he is Apple. So if he says it's not Apple, it's not Apple. And it's just hard to argue that. More times than not, he would have a reason, but sometimes it was just, I think you can do better. And again, that was one of the bad things. Like, he would reject something that I truly believed in, and he'd make me do it again, and then he'd like the new idea. I'd see the new idea on TV a few weeks later after we produced it, and then think to myself, wow, it's actually better than the first one.
So
Damn him.
What he was talking about.
Right. So he had an instinct that we could make it better. And even if I couldn't see that at the time, he did, and I had to give him credit for that.